This is a short reel.
Hi, this is Charles, and look who just clocked in.
I made it. I did it. I finally got here on time. What you don't tell people is that I usually do show up eventually. Just I always miss it by like a couple hours. So
Yeah. Maybe, just maybe, the hot dog machine will be clean tonight. It's possible.
I've been working with the vendors all day on that. So
Yeah, right. Right, because that's the vendor's job. That's awesome.
So we still working on the Oscar stuff then.
Yeah, we are. Actually, tonight, we are going to show our love for one of our small band of listeners out there as we explore the often funny, often provocative life and ultimately tragic end of Robert Opel, the man who once streaked the Academy Awards. The footage is nearly 46 years old, but even if you saw it on a screen, disconnected from any other context, you'd probably know it's an Academy Award show. It's got that look. It's shiny and unreal. And there's David Niven and his tasteful tuxedo and his urbane British accent.
If one reads the newspapers or listens to the news, it is quite obvious that the whole world is having a nervous breakdown. In the motion picture industry, we do not, thank God, contribute to the shambles by manufacturing tanks, flamethrowers, or rockets. We do something to try and help keep people sane. We turn out entertainment. The award for the Best Picture is never lightly given. And now, to divulge the contents of this year's most important envelope is a very important contributor to world entertainment, and someone, quite likely...
A naked man comes jogging from behind the set. He comes from stage right, comes down stage, and throws up the peace sign as he jogs off stage left.
Isn't it? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was almost bound to happen. But isn't it fascinating to think that probably the only laugh that man will ever get in his life is by stripping off and showing his shortcomings.
So the movie we're covering tonight is a documentary called Uncle Bob. And Uncle Bob is about Robert Opel, who is the infamous streaker from the Oscars back in the 70s. This idea was brought to us by a friend of the show and good buddy Brandon Grimes. And he suggested that we cover it. And since we're still on the heels of the Oscars, then we thought we'd go ahead and cover that today. And
coverage of... Did you know about this before Brandon reached out to us?
I knew about the streaker originally, but I didn't know that there was a documentary, nor did I know this guy had such a history.
Right. I didn't really know that stuff either. Like, I did know about the event, but I didn't know anything else. This documentary is made by his nephew, who is, oddly enough, also named Robert Opel. But he's Robert Opel with two P's, the kid is. The titular Uncle Bob is... His last name was spelled O-P-E-L rather than O-P-P-E-L. And they say pretty early on that he did that to distance himself from his family because of all the things that he was doing, like his activism and his staged events and things like that. So I guess the family never really talked about him, right, to this kid? And
Not really, no.
yeah, which is, I guess, not surprising given the time. But what did the kid say? He finds artwork and press clippings and stuff about his uncle in a closet when he's like 13 or something.
Yeah, he said he was looking for an extension cord for his boom box, and he found, looked like a tube, basically, with articles in it and pictures and that sort of thing of his uncle.
Yeah.
And he started asking questions and researching, and suddenly found out that his uncle was kind of a counterculture icon in a way.
Right, in San Francisco. And the thing that's funny is that you always have these people who do this one thing, and then you look at that and you think, well, why the hell would a guy streak at the Oscars, right? Like, what's the deal there? But then you scratch the surface a little bit, and all this other stuff comes to light, like this guy had been part of the debate team in college, and he had been in like college government. He had written speeches for Governor Ronald Reagan until he
oddly enough,
until he took a complete left turn and started doing the stuff that he was doing. And it wasn't like the streaking thing was a singular event. I guess he did this a whole bunch of other times, but he at least did it the one other time that we know of at the LA City Council meeting where
where he just casually walked up behind the councilman and put his hand on his shoulder. They were trying to pass a bill about having no nudity on public beaches or something like that.
I think that they were discussing a bill about nudity on public beaches, and the older guy that he went up behind was the police chief.
Yeah.
Ed Davis was that guy's name, I think. And that guy, his face, you could have knocked that dude over with a pin when this naked guy comes walking up to him during a council meeting. But
and keep in mind, in the documentary they show this happen. This is a very, very graphic documentary.
Yeah. Lots of horrors.
It couldn't possibly be rated, I don't think. I mean, it's whew.
Yeah. Well, I guess we should talk about the documentary and kind of set the stage, because I like the stuff that was about Robert Opal's life in the documentary. But I felt like that stuff got really muddy when his nephew started reenacting things and started trying to reenact a movie that his uncle was going to make but never made, or that he made but that the film had dried up completely. And that kind of stuff I thought muddied the actual details that were there about the elder Opal's life. Because the fascinating thing about Robert Opal was that he was kind of like this Alan Abel type figure. I don't know if you know Alan Abel, but Alan Abel was this guy who used to basically pull pranks of all types, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes they would have some sort of cause with them. A lot of the time the cause was there, but they were obscure. Like at one point, he pretended to be Howard Hughes and then had a press conference where he had bandages around his face, and they took him off, and the journalists saw that it was Alan Abel, and they were like, well, shit. They got up and walked out, But Opal was different from Alan Abel in that Opal had a specific agenda for what he was doing. So his idea behind being nude was that if we saw each other nude, then we would somehow get to know each other more deeply, because we wouldn't be hung up on the kinds of clothes people are wearing or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's true. I just don't.
It wouldn't be for me.
I just am not. I'm not.
I'd probably
really
lose friends if they saw me naked.
Yeah. I wish you'd put clothes on right now, but
it's just you, man. I mean, come on. But yeah, Opal, he really stretched out in San Francisco as far as his art and his activism. He was contemporaries with the famous and controversial photographer Robert Mapplethorpe, as well as other performance artists and artists in general like Bill Bowers, Christina McCabe, as well as a performance artist troupe known as the Coquettes, and the legendary John Waters Muse Divine.
Yeah.
And he founded a studio called Fayaway Studios in San Francisco, and they did everything from art to films to performance art, magazines. It did a little bit of everything.
Well, and the Fayaway was kind of a gallery is what it really was. So, like, he left L.A. after the whole... It's kind of murky as to whether the whole city council meeting thing happened before or after the Oscars. Like, I couldn't really... In the movie, it makes it seem like the city council thing comes after the Oscars incident. Right. But from what I read, it seemed like the city council thing happened before the Oscars. But he got like 4 months in prison for that. And he was actually, after a time, it was reduced to probation. But after that, he felt like the LAPD was kind of hounding him.
Right,
so that's when he went to San Francisco. And when he opened the Fayaway Studios, like, he was an early champion of guys like Mapplethorpe and Tom of Finland and all those people. And so he did kind of become a big deal in the San Francisco art scene and the gay art scene in general. But he was also an early supporter of Harvey Milk.
Yeah. And
the story in the documentary of how he professed his support for Harvey Milk was kind of funny. He took a picture of a local artist, a woman, who had her T-shirt pulled up and had one of Harvey Milk's like button pins pierced through her nipple.
Yeah.
And so that was how he professed his support for Harvey Milk. I guess the thing to understand about Opal is that in order to kind of understand where he was at, it kind of helps to understand where the whole gay community was at the time. Because sometimes I think people look back and see guys like Opal in a vacuum and say, well, what the hell was that dummy doing or whatever? But in reality, there was like a very specific agenda because, you know, you could get beaten up for just walking around being gay by the cops back then. Like, the cops were going in and rolling gay joints and beating people up. So,
and a lot of that was instigated by Anita Bryant, who was a Southern conservative Christian who was homophobic, and her stance on the whole thing really kind of accelerated that movement of gay bashing and, you know, rolling clubs and everything like that.
Yeah. She had been like, a Miss America who had almost been Miss Universe or something like that. And then had a couple of hit records. She was like a singer, and then started doing orange juice commercials, and then got into crusade against the gay community. It doesn't seems like kind of a weird trajectory, but
sure.
But yeah, I mean, so they were under attack. So I think Opal's exhibitionism, I guess, for lack of a better term, his philosophy behind it was kind of like acceptance through overexposure, basically putting out there and being as shocking as possible to try to push the envelope enough that if, you know, people would look at that and say, well, okay, this guy's out here and he's holding his partner's hand, but it's not like he's the guy out there like running around naked all the time. Like that was, I mean, Opal at one point created a character called like Mr. Penis Man or something, and it was a giant suit that was just him as a penis and doing interviews and stuff. He ran for president in 1976 as a nudist, and his campaign slogan was, "I have nothing to hide," which was kind of a jab at Nixon, who had said the same thing during Watergate. So when you look back at the Oscars and that whole incident, it seems like in the end that it's this funny little thing that you look up on YouTube and say, hey, look at that guy's flopping across the stage behind an old Englishman. But in reality, there was actually a method there. I mean, it's not for me to say whether it was a good method or not, but there was some sort of idea there that he had.
So around that time, too, is in that era of Robert Opal's prominence, that's when Harvey Milk was assassinated. He was murdered by was he a police officer, or he's a councilman, or? Well,
he was a former police officer who became a city supervisor right around the time that Harvey Milk did.
Yeah.
And so if you haven't seen the movie Milk, the Gus Van Sant movie, or the documentary that pretty much really informed that movie. I think it's called The Times of Harvey Milk. Those two movies are really good. Kind of a really good snapshot of Harvey Milk's life and a glimpse into the gay community at the time. But yeah, he was assassinated, November 27th, I think, 1978. So Dan White, he assassinated Harvey Milk and the mayor of San Francisco in the same day. He basically shot the mayor and then walked down the hall, called Harvey into his office, and shot him too. The thing was that White was cracking under the pressure of being a city supervisor in politics right away, so he forfeited his job, basically. He resigned. But then a couple days later, he decided that he didn't want to resign. And so he wanted his job back. Well, then by then, they were saying, no, you can't have it back. And so he went in on that Monday, and he shot both of them. Well, the way this hooks into Opal is kind of interesting because White's trial was in May, like the verdict was handed down in May of 1979. And the verdict in his case was voluntary manslaughter, which is the absolute minimum you could get for that crime, right? Like the absolute minimum. So he ended up only serving 5 years in prison overall for killing these two people. But his defense was called the Twinkie defense.
Yeah.
And the Twinkie defense was that he said he had eaten too much junk food and the sugar rush caused him to go and commit these murders, these cold-blooded killings, right? So when that was handed down that day, I think it was the 21st of May, 1979, the White Night riots happened, which was basically the gay community fighting back against this verdict that was absolutely unjust. I mean, the prosecutor, I think, later admitted that he was biased in favor of Dan White from the beginning. So the way this hooks into Robert Opal is that just a few weeks after the White Night riots and the verdict in the Dan White case, Opal staged this public event that was, I think, supposed to be a one-man play on the street called The Execution of Dan White. And basically it was going to be supposedly, I think, in Opal's mind, was supposed to be kind of this cathartic thing where they have a mock execution of Dan White and then they're kind of done with it. But in reality, I think it just kind of ratcheted tensions up even more in the city. Then Opal was killed on July 7th, 1979. So just a few weeks after he had staged this thing, he was killed in his gallery in what they say was a robbery. But, I mean, it's murky in the documentary, though, too, right? Like, that's a little murky as to what exactly was going on.
The media and the government theory was that he owed money to drug dealers, and the drug dealers came to collect. He didn't have it, and they killed him.
Right.
But the theory amongst his friends was that the government actually hired a hit on him.
Right.
And the killer, Maurice Keenan, he went to prison, and he's serving a life sentence, and so is another person that was involved in that. But he escaped prison 3 times, and one time he escaped because his cell door was unlocked, and he somehow procured civilian clothes and walked right out of the prison.
Yeah.
It's all very, very suspect.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it was kind of hard to tell in the movie what they were putting too much emphasis on and what they weren't putting enough emphasis on because,
right.
I mean, I don't know what Opal's drug habits were. You know, I don't have any idea.
Sure.
But there seemed to be a bit of denial in there a little bit in the documentary. Like this kid seemed like he was in denial a little bit because he kind of idolized his uncle. It's kind of like those documentaries where they say somebody committed suicide and they say, well, there's no way he would have committed suicide because he loved life and I knew him and he wasn't like that and I'm his mother. And it's kind of like, what do you know? Like exactly, you know, like
right.
How well
right.
do you know this person? So...
Right.
I don't know. I mean, the thing about the story is that the way that I'm going to call him Robert Opal II, the nephew. Let's call him Robert Opal II. The way that that Robert Opel II tells this story, he says that when they went in after Robert Opel I was killed, his sister, was it his sister and his mother that went into the police station, or was it his sister and somebody else, his girlfriend? I forget who it was.
It was his sister and his girlfriend, Camille.
Right,
yeah.
Because his girlfriend and another guy who may have been either Opel's ex-boyfriend or her ex-boyfriend, they were both in the gallery that night when Opel was killed, because Opel lived in this gallery, right? Like, it was kind of like his living space plus his gallery, plus it was rented out for parties of various kinds and things like that. So they were there, and his girlfriend contended that when they went to the police station, this drug dealer that was also a police informant came in and basically, in a roundabout way, kind of admitted to setting Opel up to be killed or something.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there was the whole thing with the San Francisco PD where they wrote on the side of the box with the files about Opel's death. Yeah, they wrote homicide on there, which is, I mean, that doesn't surprise me, you know.
Well, then there's a bit in there, too, about how Maurice Keenan's legal counsel passed a note to Robert Opel I's sister, and it was a note from Keenan that stated that if you ever want to talk sometime, I'll tell you what really happened.
Right.
But she was refused to meet him several times by the prison, as was Robert Opel II.
Yeah.
Here it is decades later. He's still trying to get an interview with him, but the prison won't allow it to happen because he was a relative.
And they say he's like a security risk.
Yeah. Because he's writing a book and they don't want any part of that.
Right. But he was, I think it was just for the documentary, right? Like they said, oh, well, you know, you're a relative and you're writing a book or something. And it's like, okay, well, I mean, why would that even matter? I don't know. It's like
plenty of prisoners have books written about them that actually get to interview the person involed. I mean, they're not always relatives, I know, but.
Right.
But
it's just, it's ridiculous.
It's really weird.
I know we've kind of been all over the place. That's kind of how this movie is. This movie kind of goes everywhere.
The reenactments themselves are, at times, they're interesting to watch, I guess.
Right.
But for the most part, they're silly and they're hammy. And he even reenacts the murder.
Yeah.
And, and it's not necessary. And all you got is...
And he himself stands in for his uncle. I think that's something important. And he's fully nude, which I applaud him for. That was a gutsy move.
Right.
There's a lot of full frontal nudity. I think we've already said that, but we have to say there's a lot of horn in this movie.
It's probably the most horn I've seen in a movie in quite some time.
Yeah. So, and I think that's probably by design. I mean, I think it's probably by design in that it's supposed to probably carry on the idea that Robert Opel I actually had in mind, like the message of kind of breaking down the shock factor. I think sometimes, though, it just kind of gets in the way of a story about a guy who ultimately was very interesting and who still has a lot of gaps in his life story that would be really interesting to see filled in.
Yeah, definitely.
I felt like he was so much more than just this guy that ran across the stage at the Oscars. Like he was this guy that was really, if there were no him, would there have been Robert Mapplethorpe, or would there have been a Tom of Finland? I mean, granted, they're good enough that they probably would have found their way in another way, but Opel was the way, or at least part of their journey. So, but I want to ask a question about the Oscars.
Yeah.
Did he do it on his own, or was it planned ahead of time?
I think it was planned.
Yeah.
And David Niven had a snappy comeback, a snappy joke about him revealing his shortcomings on live television.
Right.
He wasn't arrested. As a matter of fact, he was interviewed backstage by the media as if he were an Oscar winner.
Right.
So, yeah, it seemed like a big publicity stunt to draw interest in the Oscars show.
Right. Well, and I think, too, like, streaking was a big deal at the time. I mean, it had kind of come back. Because, I mean, streaking's actually been going on in one form or another for hundreds of years. But
Still does at soccer games overseas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But like in the late 70s, especially in the the fall and beginning of winter 73 into 74, it was really on college campuses. There were a lot of mostly guys streaking around and doing crazy shit in the name of whatever issue or another.
Yeah.
And I heard this story, and I can't remember if this was in the movie or if this was something I read afterwards. But the business manager for the Oscars that year, his wife was actually at the rehearsal for the show.
Mm-hmm.
She was out in the lobby with David Niven, and he asked her if she had a pen because he had this idea for this line. And so he scribbled the line down, and he was kind of proud of it, the line that he had come up with. And it was the line that he ended up using when Opal ran across the stage.
Yeah.
So that seemed to point to the idea that it was a setup, along
Right.
with what you were talking about, the fact that they didn't tackle him, they didn't arrest him.
Yeah.
He actually was interviewed. But then there's the whole thing of like, well, if streaking had become really popular and you have this song from Ray Stevens, The Streak, come out a week before, or not even a week before the Oscars, was Niven just saying, hey, this could possibly happen? Because that's always been the explanation, is that Niven just kind of somehow said, well, if it's going to happen anytime, it's probably going to happen on the Oscars, so I should come up with this
be
line.
Prepared.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that makes Niven basically what, like a low-grade Nostradamus? Like, I don't...
Right. And Opal was on the Mike Douglas show.
Right.
Sitting next to B. Arthur, which I thought was hilarious for some reason.
Yeah.
And as he explained it, he had entered the backstage area wearing just a pair of coveralls.
Right.
And before he ran out, he took the coveralls off, ran out on stage, went to the other side of the stage, ran around the backstage area, put the clothes back on, and no one stopped him.
Right.
Usually in a case like that, where if it's somebody running out during a sporting event or something like that, they're tackled whether they're, wearing clothes or not, and they're hauled away.
Right.
But in his case, he was untouched all the way around, got his clothes back on, and they were like, hey, let's go talk to the media. They were arrested. I don't buy it. I really don't buy it.
Opal's explanation on the Mike Douglas show was basically that people were just so shocked backstage they didn't know what to do.
Right.
So I could buy that, I guess, in a way, but I don't know. Like, it seems like a lot of stars aligned for that guy to get out of there having run across the stage without getting the shit beat out of him or something, I mean...
If I'm not mistaken, too, when he ran across the stage, his junk didn't make the broadcast, right? Wasn't the camera positioned in such a way that he wasn't exposed on television?
When you're looking at the screen, he comes up over the right side of Niven at first, and in that part of it, it's closed. You can basically kind of see the pubes. Yeah, you can see that, but you can't really see the real stuff.
And then the tackle.
Yeah, and then he comes around the other side, he throws up the peace sign, and then goes off stage left, and you don't really see anything. I think you might have seen his ass or something, but it was kind of positioned in a way for minimum exposure. But then again, that's kind of how they frame those Oscar presentations and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. When they show the footage of Opal on the Mike Douglas show talking about it, and Douglas, I think, brings up the idea that people think that it was staged. Opal never says, no, it wasn't staged, at least not in the footage they showed. He never says, no, it wasn't staged, it was just something I did on my own, or at least not that I can remember. He just kind of and then Douglas looked at the audience and said, what do people think? Do you think that it was staged? And the whole, he's like, clap if you think it was staged. People start clapping, and when they cut back, Opal's actually clapping too. So I wonder if it actually was like a whole thing, like if it was something that was just kind of a put together affair to kind of capitalize on the whole streaking thing. But I mean,
could be.
Can you imagine though? 76 million people saw that telecast. 76 million people. You can't get 76 million people to vote nowadays, or what? I don't know.
Right.
You can't get 76 million people to do anything together nowadays.
Yeah.
With the way TV is now, it's unfathomable.
Oh, yeah.
It's just
Too
absolutely
many choices.
Yeah. So what did you think of the documentary overall? Like, would you suggest people see it just because it's kind of one of the only documents that really is out there about Robert Opel?
For that alone, yes, it's interesting and it's worth seeing. If you're bashful, you may not want to watch it.
Wait a minute. Are you saying saying if you're one of the 7 dwarfs and you don't want to watch this movie? Is that
Yeah. If you're dopey, you're fine. But if you're bashful, no. If you're squeamish at the sight of penises, you may not want to watch it. But no. I liked about 50% of it in that I liked the story, and I wish the documentary was geared more toward the story and not the reenactments and the frustration of not knowing exactly what happened.
right?
You can tell the story on its own without having to do all the theatrics.
Right.
And like I said, some of the theatrics that he did, some of the stagings, they were kind of interesting to watch. Really, the reenactment of the murder wasn't too bad. But I just kind of unnecessary. You didn't need it to tell the story, I guess.
Right. Some of the people he talks to are people that were there, and they were artists that Opel had either helped or people that were around with him all the time or whatever. But then he also talked to Abel Ferrara.
Yeah. Who was a producer as well, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if he was around at the time or... Because it's never really brought up in the documentary as to what his relationship is to Robert Opel, or if there's anything there, like if there's some sort of connection that he has with it. I didn't really...
Yeah.
Because I don't know if he's like a San Francisco filmmaker, or... I always kind of envisioned him as being a New Yorker.
Well, his accent would indicate that too. Yeah, he's got a deep New York accent. So
yeah.
He's another man that's interested in putting penises on screen. So Harvey Keitel and Bad Lieutenant,
Yeah, well,
never cared to see that, but there it was. So.
You know something, though? I think the penis might be an underrepresented thing, because we have a lot of full frontal female nudity, or at least we used to in movies. Maybe it's time to...
Sure. Fair play.
Get the junk out,
Here at the All Night Drive-In Picture Show, we fully endorse penises on screen, apparently. So.
I mean, we don't have to.
You've never seen a penis on screen till you've seen it outdoors.
And it's cold, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Okay, Uncle Bob. It's a 78-minute documentary. It's a long 78 minutes.
I think it could have been a tight 45.
I mean, I think it actually could have been a 2-hour documentary, but they could have delved more into his story, I think.
Yeah.
I just don't know if there's enough out there about him. Robert Opel II, the nephew, is a very angsty type of guy, which I can understand that, but some of the movie becomes... kind of him working out some issues or something.
Mm-hmm.
Although I will say the one thing about him that I really liked was the part where he showed part of this movie that he made when he was 13 or something, where he played the judge and he got his mom to sit down and basically had his grandmother and his mom testify about his uncle's life and what they thought about his death. But the thing about that was that they were both just kind of nervously laughing through everything, and they never said anything, or at least that we saw, they never said anything about it. So we never heard anything out of their mouths about their brother and their son. I just felt like that was a missed opportunity if there was something there,
Right.
So that's the kind of stuff that hopefully someday somebody will dig into a bit more and maybe talk more about this guy's life.
Well, if you're interested in seeing Uncle Bob, it is currently streaming on Amazon Prime.
Yeah, it's also on YouTube. You can see it on YouTube for free. And we'll also have some links in the show notes to a couple of things that are in the movie. Obviously, the Oscar run, we'll have that linked in the show notes. And we'll also have something else that's reenacted in the movie, which is Anita Bryant getting a pie in the face in a press conference by a gay man, and then she prays for him. So, and it's all really very theatrical, but we have the NBC News footage. We'll hook that up for you in the show notes as well. So,
all right.
Uncle Bob.
Uncle Bob.
Uncle Bob.
Coming soon to this drive-in theater.
Join us next week as we explore the dark art of ninjutsu in truly outrageous fashion with Enter the Ninja and Revenge of the Ninja. That's it for the short reel this week. You can connect with us by following us on social media at All Night Drive-In on Twitter and Instagram, by searching the All Night Drive-In Picture Show on Facebook, and by emailing us at allnightdriveinpictureshow@gmail.com. Please subscribe to and rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcatcher if possible. And more importantly, tell your friends. Sneaking your friends into the show in the trunk is definitely allowed at the All Night Drive-In Picture Show. I mean, Stubbs probably won't like it, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So we'll see you next week on the All Night Drive-In Picture Show. Thanks for listening.
The Short Reel is edited and produced by Markham Harvey. Our theme song is by Burning Mirror and edited by The Night Watch. I'm your announcer, Lila Pseudonym. This has been a Clown Business Coalition production. Thank you and good night.